Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Timothy here with Mana Rocks. We're gonna go ahead and continue spoiler season for what is this set called? Ikoria. We stopped with Brokos last time, and I think they're trying to push out the entire spoiler season in the span of a week because there's like 60 new spoilers since we cut off with this card yesterday, and that was pretty late in the day too. We're going to go ahead and divide this up into two videos, unless we go super fast or something. So probably about 30 cards, 30 cards. And we'll talk about a couple more of the mythics, a couple more of the themes we see popping up and stuff like that. I did want to clarify these Godzilla cards. We saw a couple of them yesterday, but I hadn't really read up on them. Let me go ahead and just click one real quick. This is a perfect example. Sprite Dragon. So we saw this card yesterday with the alternate art, and this is actually a card in the set. It's called Sprite Dragon, but those Godzilla-themed cards have a different name. It's still the same card though, and you'll see underneath the printed name on those alternate arts, it has the name Sprite Dragon or whatever the actual card is. So they are all cards that are in Ikoria. The Godzilla stuff is just like reskinning in the form of a different Godzilla-based creature or something. Like the big moth we saw, there's Mothra, right? And there's an alternate art for it. So these are cards in the set, but as far as like the actual Godzilla theme cards, I'm not sure how you get a hold of them yet. I'm sure collector boosters and stuff like that, but I don't think they'll be coming in actual packs. Don't quote me though, I don't know. But we're gonna go ahead and kick things off. Excuse me, with Crystal Giant. This is a 3 mana. Oh, you can't see the alternate arts here. So this is a 3 mana artifact creature, and it's really weird. It's a 3/3, and it says at the beginning of your turn's combat, randomly choose one of the counters that aren't on Crystal Giant. And then it says in parentheses, I'm not sure how this is worded in English, but it says, of the 10 types of counters in this set, put a counter of that type on Crystal Giant. So it's really weird. We've seen these counters. We've seen like menace counters, trample counters, so on and so forth. There are no haste counters. And then I think +1/+1 counter, it counts as one of the 10. But, you know, over the course of a couple turns, this thing is just going to start gaining abilities. It might gain, like, reach, vigilance, blah, 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 and drop off. Or it might gain lifelink, flying, hexproof, blah, blah, blah. You have no control over it because it's random. But the card is neat. It's a base 3 mana 3/3, and as soon as you go to combat, it's going to gain some ability. And then by the time you're ready to attack with it, it'll have 2 abilities, and it just keeps going from there. The thing that really interests me is if this is how it's actually worded, of the 10 types of counters in this set, how does that work for constructed? Does it still only pull from the counters in Ikoria? It seems really weird to me. But that is Crystal Giant. This is one of the Godzilla cards, like Mecha Godzilla or something. I don't know. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the Godzilla stuff because I just don't know, and I don't want to offend any Godzilla fans out there, you know? Kicking out with our last Mythic... what do you want to call these? Apexes? Our last Apex. This is Nethroi Apex of Death. It is white, black, green, and 2 mana. So this is your Abzan Apex, if you will. It is a cat nightmare beast. I found out yesterday that each color is associated with, you know, a creature type. So white is cat, black is nightmare, green is beast, blue I think is elemental, and red is dinosaur. So these all have these weird creature types, but they all match up with, you know, the colors that they're in. Cool alternate art, and then you've got this down here, which is the, I guess you can't see it. I guess I can click that real quick because it's kind of awesome. Oh, it just redirected. All right, there you go. Put that on screen. It's really tiny, but anyway, back to Nethroi Apex of Death. This one's kind of ridiculous. It might be the best of the bunch. I'm not sure. So 5 mana, 5/5, has Death Touch and Lifelink. 5 mana, 5/5, Death Touch, Lifelink. So already, like, Yarick was, you know, 3/5 with Death Touch and Lifelink. Really good ability. This one also has a really strong ability. It says, when this creature mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Like, come on. What is that? Its mutate cost is 7. For black, black, and then a split green-white mana. But keep in mind that the way mutate works, you could pay the 7 and put this onto another creature and make that mutate, or you could just have this on board and then mutate another creature onto it. This can also be your commander, and you can mutate from the command zone. It does, you know, obey commander tax and all that stuff. But this card is absolutely bonkers. The effect is so splashy, it just kind of has to be the best one of the bunch, in my opinion. I don't know if Standard's going to have a mutate deck floating around or anything like that. But, the fact that this is base 5 mana 5/5 Death Touch lifelink in limited, you're not going to beat this card. You can't unless you just remove it immediately. And if you do, maybe they already got value off of it. I mean, total power 10 or less, that's like in limited, that's 3 or 4 creatures coming back from the graveyard. You're not going to beat that. So if you're playing this in limited, I think you have to probably wait until you get to 7 mana, and then you just win the game. This is 7 mana, win the game, but 5 mana still just an extremely beefy, solid creature. So Nethroi gets my pick for the best of the bunch. It's just so splashy. It takes a little bit of work to get there, but is what it is. Moving on, we have Dirge Bat. There we go. Dirge Bat's pretty simple. It's 2 black for a 3/3 flash flyer. Whenever it mutates, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Boom. The mutate cost is 6, and as a lot of people in comments on different sites have mentioned, that is a really expensive mutate cost. But first off, you would be willing to pay 6 for, destroying an opponent's creature. That is something you can do in limited. And the real trick here is that you go on turn 4, on your opponent's end step, you flash this out, so your opponent, presumably doesn't have mana up, can't deal with it, and then on turn 5 you untap and you mutate onto this, and you get to destroy a creature, which is pretty insane. And you have a 3/3 flyer to show for it, probably with a couple other abilities. This is a type of card that if you can consistently mutate onto it, you're going to be able to just control the board, and your opponent's not going to be able to stick creatures. So it's kind of a must kill. And as a base 4 mana 3/3 flash flyer, that's already really good. If you just ignore all of the mutate stuff. So easy first pick. In limited, we're going to see a lot of those. This set is full of very strong cards from what I can tell. Yidaro, Wandering Monster. This one's really cool. So we've got 5 red for an 8/8. 7 mana 8/8 with Trample and Haste. So 7 mana 8/8 is not really something I'm super excited about in limited. But Trample and Haste does kind of get you there, right? Haste on your big giant creature is relevant, and Trample is what really pushes it over the top. It has Cycle in for 1 and a red, so pretty cheap Cycle in cost. It is, again, nice to have Cycle in on your expensive creatures in case you are missing land drops or you just need to find some sort of action. But this actually has a payoff for Cycle in it. It says, whenever you cycle Yidaro, shuffle it into your library from your graveyard. If you cycled a card named Yidaro, Wandering Monster, 4 times this game, put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard instead. So in limited, that's a little bit of a pipe dream because you're going to have to draw this same card. It's a rare 4 times, but in constructed, you can kind of build around it, right? And your goal is to just draw as many Yidaros as possible and cycle them. And it says if you've cycled a card named Yidaro 4 or more times. Okay, it doesn't say that in the translation. It does say 4 or more times. So after you have cycled Yidaro at least 3 other times, every additional Yidaro you end up cycling is just going to be a 2 mana 8/8 Trample Haste creature. That also draws you a card. You still draw the card for cycling, right? And just a little rules lawyering thing here. If you cycle Yidaro, you get the triggered ability and shuffle it back, and then you draw a card off cycling, just so you know. It would be interesting to see someone build a commander deck with Yidaro where your whole goal is to cycle your commander into your deck and keep drawing it or something. I don't know. But Legendary Dinosaur Turtle seems really strong. In limited, I think this card is playable as just a 7 mana 8/8 Trample Haste. That is a respectable creature in what looks to be a particularly slow format. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and we need to see the whole set. But yeah, that's really good. And then just having Cycle and makes basically any big fatty playable, right? Even if this isn't an amazing card when it affects the board, your opponent has like a Death Toucher out or something, then yeah, you can still cycle it away, and that's really good. So Yidaro, another legendary from the set. We've got an egg here. Giant Moth Cocoon. The Godzilla art for this is pretty sick. It also looks really tiny, but I guess it's a cocoon for a giant moth. It's not a gigantic moth cocoon is what they're going for. Anyway, Giant Moth Cocoon is 1 colorless mana for a 0/2 egg, and it says whenever this creature mutates, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So I think the idea here is that you're supposed to stick this on turn 1, and then you're supposed to just keep mutating onto this over and over. And obviously you want to put the creature on top of the cocoon. You want to mutate on top, not on the bottom, because you don't want a 0/2 with a bunch of abilities. You want an actual stat line. But this is supposed to be a base for your mutating, and it rewards you by making sure your creature is getting bigger every single time. I need to correct something I said yesterday. When you mutate on top of a creature, it doesn't suddenly gain summon and sickness. It's still treated as the same permanent. So if it's been on board for, since the beginning of your turn, it can still attack even if you mutated a new creature on top of it. Yesterday I thought if you mutated a new creature on top, that creature would have summon and sickness, but it does not, unless you obviously played the whole thing that turn. So that's just a correction from yesterday. But Giant Moth Cocoon is a build around type card for limited. It's colorless too, and there's mutate in every color. So this could be a card that people really want in their mutate based decks. Excuse me. Everquill Phoenix. Oh, we've got another Phoenix. 2 red for a 4/4 rare Phoenix. It has mutate for 3 in a red, so the mutate cost is the same as the actual casting cost, just a little bit more flexible. It has flying, so 4 mana 4/4 flyer. I'm already in. Sign me up for limited. And traditionally, these Phoenix type cards, if they're strong enough to deal damage, they have seen play in standard. So this one has a little bit of extra flavor on it. It says whenever this creature mutates, create a red artifact token named Feather. Not Feather the Redeemed, just create Feather with 1 sacrifice Feather. Oh, sorry, Feather. Return target Phoenix card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Okay, I have to go on just a mini rant. I know we got a lot of cards to talk about, but why is there not a legendary Phoenix? Why could we not have just made this a legendary Phoenix? It would have been perfect. You could have given it some other nonsense on there to make it just a little bit more legendary. But the fact that this is like almost a Phoenix Lord, it can reanimate other Phoenixes from your graveyard to the battlefield. Seems like it would have been a perfect opportunity to finally make a legendary Phoenix. But, that's all neither here nor there. This is still a fantastic card. Again, just like the Bat we just saw, this is a base 4 mana 4/4 flyer, which is already very good. Good enough for constructed. Definitely very good and limited. Mutate adds a lot to it, and again, this is the type of creature that it can bring itself back, so you're a little bit less hesitant to just keep mutating onto it, because then you keep getting feather tokens, which you can sacrifice to bring this thing back to the battlefield. And it's not sorcery speed. You bring the creature back tapped, of course, so you can't like surprise block with your Phoenix or whatever. But what other Phoenixes are in Standard? I'm sure there's another Phoenix in Standard that I'm blanking on, but this can bring those back as well. And Everquill Phoenix gets a nod for A+. You're just going to see a lot of A+ rares. Here's another one. King Kong. Kogla, the Titan Ape. 3 GGG. 6 mana, which is very generous for what you're about to get here. It's a legendary ape creature. King Kong. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Again, like here we go, another rare where I just read half the card and I'm like, sign me up. 6 mana 7/6 and fight your creature. 7/6 is gonna live. First off, sure, there's some death touch stuff going around this set. And this does have the new template in for fight, where once you've chosen what you're going to fight, it's going to happen, and then it gives your opponent the opportunity to respond. They've changed that recently, so as to not, have some feel-bad moments where you target something, and then your opponent has to respond, and then you just choose not to fight. That's how it used to be. Kogla is going to come down and probably just smash something, which is insane, because you've already got a 7/6. It's got more, though. Whenever Kogla attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defendant player controls. When it attacks, it's not even like when it deals combat damage or something. So repeated artifact, enchantment, destruction. Already probably has commander written on it there. It's a little bit expensive, but as far as commander cards go, repeated artifact or enchantment destruction cannot be like overstated. And then finally you have kind of like a Teamer Sabertooth type ability. It says 1 in a green, return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. So I'm not sure how many humans we're going to get in green as far as like limited or constructed goes, and I'm not sure how you would build this. I'm not sure you would capitalize on that last ability a lot if you're playing this in like Commander or something, but I'm going to be playing this card in Commander. I have a Selvala deck, and this is perfect for Selvala. You can even bounce Selvala back to my hand to protect it. It can bounce a card like Eternal Witness or something like that. Just any other random human you have laying around. And this thing gains indestructible when you do it, so you can just kind of like go off with Kogla, which is kind of insane. This is just an insane package. 6 mana, kill a creature, have a giant creature that can protect itself, reuse my humans, and destroys artifacts or enchantments when it attacks. Very good. Obviously, insane limited card. Triple green, that's a little bit worrisome in a deck in a set that might be pushing you towards 3 colors, but Kogo definitely has my seal of approval. Next up, we've got one of our gold uncommons. It's Primal Empathy. 1 green blue for an uncommon enchantment. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, which is really good. It also doesn't target for some reason. It doesn't put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Oh, I guess, yeah. It doesn't target because you would have to choose a target before the first part of the ability resolved. Whatever, that kind of makes sense. But this seems like a very powerful card for limited. Potentially an engine for commander, maybe standard, I don't know yet. But for limited, this is very powerful because you're you get either or. It's not like you miss out. If this was just the first part, it would still be possibly playable in a lot of different decks. I don't know if blue-green is positioned to always have the biggest creature on board, but you're playing green, so perhaps. And if you do, you just have your own personal Howlin' Mine, which is incredible in limited. Have you ever drawn 2 cards per turn in limited? It's very strong. And the downside is that if you don't have the biggest creature on board, you get to start putting +1/+1 counters on your creature every turn. The only thing that has me a little weary about this is that the turn you play it, it doesn't do anything. And if you for some reason don't have creatures on board, this doesn't do anything at all. And, if you go like turn 3 Primal Empathy with no creatures on board, that's not super exciting. But then if you follow up with a big creature on turn 4, it's pretty good. So it's not quite built around as much as it is just good. But there are some downsides. It is limited. Sometimes you end up with no creatures on board, so keep that in mind. But Primal Empathy seems very good. Any uncommon that can start drawing you multiple cards per turn is worth looking at. Excuse me again. Labyrinth Raptor. This art is pretty gnarly. It's black, red for a 2/2 rare nightmare dinosaur. Again, black nightmare, red dinosaur, you get it. It has Menace, so already, again, in limited, 2 mana, 2/2 Menace is a card that I'm pretty happy to play. It needs a little bit more to justify being a rare, but thankfully this one does. It says, whenever a creature you control with Menace becomes blocked, defendant player sacrifices a creature blocking it. And then, for black and red, it says creatures you control with Menace get +1/+0 until end of turn. So you've got a Menace Lord here. And we'll see a couple other cards where it seems like Black-Red's theme in this set is Menace, which, big red flags. Labyrinth Raptor seems to shout that as loudly as possible. This is a very good effect. So just the static ability means if Labyrinth Raptor attacks into 2 2/2s, and my opponent would normally just block with those 2/2s and I'd have to choose one to kill, Labyrinth Raptor will trigger, make your opponent sacrifice a creature, and then hopefully trade off for the other one. And it also means, if your opponent has like a 2/2 and a 1/1, they can't really even block this thing. And then you've got the threat of activation here, which says, okay, if you are going to block, I can pump this thing a couple times and take out both of your creatures. Or if you're not going to block, I can pump this thing a couple times and just push through extra damage. And it pumps your other creatures with Menace, and it triggers when your other Menace creatures block or become blocked. So this is really strong. You can play around this effect a little bit by just throwing extra blockers in the mix, right? If you have 1/1 tokens and you're already blocking with 2 other creatures, you might as well block with those 2 creatures and the other token. That way you can sacrifice the token to the triggered ability. And then have your other creatures, kind of duke it out with the Labyrinth Raptor. But this card seems very strong. I don't know, constructed, whether or not you're going to have a Menace deck or something like that. But Labyrinth Raptor seems pretty powerful. Stacks in multiples, too. I didn't think about that for constructed purposes. If you have multiple Labyrinth Raptors and they try to block with anything, they're just going to get completely destroyed. Okay, check out this one. Colossification, 5 GG, 7 mana for an aura. When it enters the battlefield, tap the enchanted creature. So whatever you put this on is tapping. Enchanted creature becomes the Abyss. It gets +20/+20. So 7 mana to say, hey, for the rest of the game, you have to deal with this creature or you will die if it hits you. Obviously, it taps the creature the turn it comes down, so that's a little fair. It's not very likely at 7 mana that you're going to be able to play this and find a way to untap that creature or something like that. So you'll probably have to wait a turn, and then if you untap with that creature, maybe you can make it unblockable, maybe you give it flying, maybe your opponent just straight up can't block it. You win the game if it hits your opponent, which is, to me, just insane. We'll see if there are hexproof creatures in this set. There's at least one we'll talk about in the second half of this video that can gain hexproof, but Colossification seems insane to me. If there ends up being good cheap removal, it can end up being a little bit worse, but even if your opponent is on a high removal deck, I don't think you cut this. This is an aura worth taking a risk for because it just wins the game if that creature hits. Pretty crazy. Again, there's constructed, implications and stuff like that, but Colossification, they definitely wanted to try something out here, and I think they succeeded. Quickly, Arcane Signet looks like it will be back for the Commander decks. I expect to just see Arcane Signet in every Commander deck moving forward. They printed this card in Brawl decks as a big middle finger to Commander players, but it looks like it's going to be permanent addition to Commander decks moving forward. What do we have next? Blood Curdle. Blood Curdle is 3 and a black for a common instant. Destroy target creature. Put a menace counter on a creature you control. Again, with the menace in black here. This is constructed all-star removal. It's a little bit of a murder. I think we've had pretty good removal recently, and this is I would say this is pretty good. 4 mana instant kill a creature is what you come to expect in limited, and if you get better than that, if you get like actual murder or cards like Drag to the Grave and stuff like that, then you're fairly happy. But 4 mana instant speed kill anything is going to be something you're reasonably happy with, and then you get an extra little bonus. It might not even matter, right? If you're playing a control deck, you might not care about menace, or if you have an empty board, this doesn't really do anything. Thankfully it doesn't target, so you don't have to have a target in order to kill your opponent's creature. And by that I mean a target for the menace counter. So, Blood Curdle, just common, good removal for limited. Shredded Sails. This is a card you're going to put in your deck and cycle most of the time. It's 1 in a red for an instant. It's a common. It says choose one, destroy target artifact, or deal 4 damage to target creature with flying, and it has cycling for 2 colorless mana. I like when sideboard cards have cycling because it gives you an out to things that you might not otherwise have answers to in your deck. Like, you're probably not main decking a Plummet, but when you can cycle your Plummet, that makes it a much better inclusion in your deck, because sometimes you don't need a Plummet. Sometimes it's dead in your hand, and that's the risk of running a card like Plummet in your main board. Even out of the sideboard, Shredded Sails gets better because it's going to either snipe a big flyer, destroy an artifact. I don't know that we've seen too many artifacts that need to be killed, but if your opponent has like that 3/3 Golem or something like that, then you'll be pretty happy to have a Shredded Sails, and if it's just a dead card in your hand, you can cycle it away. So it's a main deckable sideboard card, which is just another boon for cycling. Cycling just helps cards be more playable and makes things happen. Not much to talk about there, but you can include this card in your main board. Just be prepared to cycle it away if there are no targets. Back for more. Yeah, back for more. I don't know why I did that, I'm sorry. 4 black, green for an uncommon instant. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. When you do, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. There's a lot of fighting in this set, geez. Kind of makes sense with all the big dorky creatures running around. But so, how do we feel about 6 mana, reanimate? It's only from your graveyard, and I tend to not like reanimates too much when they only pull from your graveyard. At least the big 5-6 mana reanimates, and this is 6, but it's an instant, which means you've got kind of the surprise factor on your hand, and you get to fight something when that creature comes into play. So if you've got big enough creatures to reanimate, this seems pretty strong. And keep in mind, there's cycling in this set, right? We've already seen an 11/11 Trampler in green that you can cycle away for 2 mana. Can you imagine that? That's going to be the wombo combo, right? You cycle away the 11/11 Trampler, and then you cast back for more on it, and then you get to fight whatever the heck you want because you have an 11/11, so you don't care about your opponent's creature. You get to do that at instant speed, so you probably get to just destroy whatever your opponent was attacking with, and then you just have an 11/11 Trampler on board. This thing doesn't go away or anything like that. Plus, there are probably little Death Touchers and stuff floating around the set, who knows. But Back for More seems like it justifies its 6 mana cost, but it does ask a little bit of you. It asks that you put a good creature in your graveyard, and that you have it there by the time you get to 6 mana. So Cyclers are your friend with this card. Even if you bring back the 8 mana 8/8 Death Touch, that's really powerful too, because you're going to kill a creature when it comes in. You're probably going to, get a surprise block, and you're going to have your creature on board. So this is excuse me, if you can use it in combat to eat an attacker and fight another creature, this is a potential 3-for-1, which is quite a bit off of your instant speed uncommon, your 6-mana uncommon. But there are times that maybe you don't have a creature in your graveyard, it's not worth reanimating. This just doesn't do what you really want it to do. So it's a little bit risky, but it seems very powerful as far as an uncommon fight spell or reanimation spell goes. Okay, Voracious Great Shark. First off, this art is just like disgusting. He's like eating a boat or something. You don't know. Voracious Great Shark is 3 blue for a shark. It has flash, and it says whenever Voracious Great Shark enters the battlefield, counter target artifact or creature spell. My old friend Mystic Snake. I get so heated about Mystic Snake because I play Commander and it just always gets me. But Voracious Great Shark is now the world's biggest Mystic Snake. 5 mana, counter a creature and get a flash 5/4, or counter an artifact, whatever. Counter a creature and create a 5/4 at instant speed. Seems absolutely nuts to me. You don't even have to counter a creature with this. This is just a flash 5/4 for 5, which is fantastic. Also, Shark by itself just seems so lonely in a set with like elemental nightmare beasts and stuff like that. I wish this was a nightmare shark personally, or maybe a cat shark. Where's our cat shark? Anyway, Voracious Great Shark seems really strong to me. Obvious first pick in limited. I don't know if this card is pushed enough for constructed play, but it seems like it probably will be. I think Frilled Mystic is still in standard too, so I don't know. Maybe there's something there. You just counter everything your opponent does, and you flash in giant creatures while doing it. So Voracious Great Shark is not much to talk about for limited. It's just one of those obviously good rares, which we've seen a lot of. There's going to be a lot of easy first pick rares in this set. What do we have next? Oh, an easy first pick uncommon. Auspicious Starix? I don't know. It's an Elk Beast, whatever. 4 and a green for an uncommon creature, Elk Beast. It's a 6/6. So if we ignore all this mutate stuff, 5 mana 6/6, sure, sign me up. That's a good vanilla creature for limited purposes. You know, the creatures in the set seem like they're all pushed to be bigger, but you can ignore all the mutate stuff, and if you've got a good vanilla creature on your hand, you know, the mutate is just gravy there, and this thing has mutate for 6 mana, so it's more expensive to mutate onto something. But it says whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Put those permanent cards onto the battlefield. Oh my god. So, first off, 5 mana 6/6, fine. That's fine. That's a good card. That's okay. But if you pay 1 more mana and you mutate onto something, so obviously you'll probably put this on top because 6/6 is pretty powerful. It's probably better than whatever you have by turn 5 or 6. You mutate onto another creature. That triggers the mutate ability. You get to dig until you hit another permanent, and you just put that permanent on the battlefield. This can hit lands. It's not like that other one we saw yesterday where it can't hit lands. But you just get the next permanent off the top of your library, slam that on the battlefield. And then if you ever mutate again, you get to do that twice. You get to mutate twice, which means you get to dig for the next 2 permanents and put those on the battlefield. And in limited, you probably won the game. Probably not pushed enough for constructed. 5 mana 6/6 isn't actually what you want for constructed. And the mutate cost is pretty expensive for constructed purposes. But for limited, you've got possibly a bomb uncommon here. I don't know how often you're going to be able to mutate, but the fact that you can mutate onto anything that's not a human means that I think it's just going to be able to happen whenever you want it to. So all of your creatures with mutate, you're going to have the option to mutate, right? And keep in mind, mutate is a little bit of a risky mechanic. It's basically like you're sacrificing a creature to get these mutate costs. Think of it like Emerge. Remember Emerge from Eldritch Moon, where you had to sack a creature and then you could play the Emerge creature for cheaper? This is very similar, where you're basically consuming another resource you have on board, or a resource from your hand to get this combined effect, which makes your opponent's removal a lot better. That 4 mana instant we just saw, that's pretty good. Because, you know, it takes care of these mutate stacks that your opponents put a lot of time and resources in. But this one gives you extra permanence whenever you mutate it. So if you mutate it at least once, you are going to get at least an extra permanent, so it replaces itself. And if you ever mutate this a second time, like, game over, your opponent's done. Seems really strong. I'll have my eye on that one when we're trying to figure out the best uncommon for the set. Next up, General's Enforcer. White, black, so 2 mana for a 2/3, already pretty good stats. It's a human soldier, and it gives your other legendary humans, actually it just gives legendary humans you control indestructible. So more human tribal stuff. It looks like white, black is going to have human tribal stuff just throughout this set. It is not legendary itself, so it's not indestructible, but if you happen to have any other legendary humans, sure, they're indestructible, whatever. For 2 white and a black, exile a target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. This is a very powerful uncommon as well. If you ignore the whole legendary human things, which might end up mattering, I don't know. 4 mana to exile cards from the graveyard, which we've already seen black and green tend to care about the graveyard a little bit here. You can make 1/1s, 4 mana, make a 1/1, 4 mana, make a 1/1. Seems pretty strong, right? And that's all on a base 2/3 for 2. The thing that has me a little bit weary about this whole human archetype is that you can't mutate onto humans. So if you have good mutate cards in your deck, you might actually want to try and shy away from having too many humans in your deck. Which means also this makes a nice little dynamic for a limited draft, because you might be like the only person who cares about humans and get sick cards like this. So who knows? Not very good in multiples, but it is a 2 mana 2/3, which is a good stat line with 1 very relevant ability and 1 very irrelevant ability that'll probably get somebody at least once in this format. Archipelago. Get it? Like archipelago? 5 blue for a 7/7 uncommon Leviathan. It has mutate for 6 mana, so a cheaper mutate cost. And it says whenever this creature mutates, tap up to X target creatures, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. So you've got like a Shipbreaker Kraken. It's down here in the thesaurus. Shipbreaker Kraken. Not as rawly powerful. That card was busted. But Archipelago pays you off for mutating time and time again, right? This is the type of one that I'm really happy to run out as a 6 mana mutate, because I add a 7/7 to the board. Again, this is big enough that it's probably going to be the top of whatever stack you put it on, and then you get to just tap a creature around. It does pay you off a little bit for then mutating onto it additional times, because it just locks down your opponent's attackers and blockers. So it gives you time to kind of pile all your stuff onto this one Voltron-y mutate creature, and then you get to kill your opponent. So it seems pretty strong, again, for an uncommon. All of these mutate cards are just pushed, so I don't know how limited is going to play out. Maybe it plays out that the first person who mutates something just wins, because cards like this are extremely powerful. But again, you're incurring a type of risk if you put too many eggs in one basket and your opponent goes 4 mana, kill your mutate creature. Keep in mind, it's probably... So there's an interesting thing that I want to mention here. If I go to cast this card and target one of my creatures, my opponent has to make a decision, right? Because if they go to kill the creature that's already on board that I'm targeting, I'm still going to get Archipelago, but it won't have the mutate ability, right? Because it didn't successfully mutate. It's just going to come out as a 7/7. My opponent might want me to resolve the Archipelago, get my mutate trigger, tap some creatures down, and then kill it, so that it takes care of the entire stack. Because if you kill a creature that's been mutated onto another creature, the entire stack just dies, right? So there's an interesting dynamic of when you choose to kill your opponent's creature. Do you let them get their mutate trigger and then kill it so that you take care of everything? Or do you kill the creature in response when they're targeting it so that they don't get the mutate trigger, but then you have to deal with the actual creature because it still pops into play? I don't know yet how it's going to play out. A couple more to talk about here until we cut it for the second half. So we have Death's Oasis. This is white, black, green for a rare enchantment, so an Abzan colored enchantment. It says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Again, a lot of self-mill going on in black-green here. Then return a creature with lesser converted mana cost than the one that died from your graveyard to your hand. So if a 5-drop non-token creature dies, you mill yourself for 2, and then you return a creature with converted mana cost 4 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Kind of like Soul Shift, right? Soul Shift for anything, not just spirits. It also has an activated ability. For 1 mana, you can sack it to gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost among creatures you control. Pretty sweet. This is a little bit iffy as far as a first pick rare or something like that goes, but it has the potential to just draw out a game and make it really difficult for your opponent to deal with your things. It does force yourself to mill, right? So you could potentially mill yourself too much if you're recycling creatures and they keep dying and stuff like that. But, if a 5-drop dies and you get back a 4-drop and then you have a 3-drop in your graveyard, you play the 4-drop, your opponent kills it, you get a 3-drop back, that's a nightmare for a control deck to have to deal with, right? When every creature that dies into another creature, they're probably not going to be able to sustain killing you or mill you out in time. And I guess the activated ability is something, so you've got something against aggro decks where you can just, pop off and gain a little bit of life. But I don't know. I don't know if I'll be first picking this card, but it's the type of card if you're already drafting Abzan and you pick it up, then it's got a lot of value attached to it. It doesn't actually do anything when it comes into play. Your creatures have to be dying for this to matter, but I'm sure you can find ways to sacrifice your own creatures for value and things of that nature. So Death's Oasis is interesting, not as bomby as some of the other rares. Clash of Titans, appropriate name. This is 3 red for an instant. It says target creature fights another target creature. And then it reminds you what fighting means, as though fight weren't on 6 other cards in this set without reminder text. So I'm assuming this is not a mistranslation. It doesn't seem like it's a mistranslation. Normally, a card like this would say target creature fights another target creature you don't control, so that you can't have 2 of your opponent's creatures fight each other. But I think that's actually what they're going for here. This lets you choose 2 of your opponent's creatures and have them fight each other. And if one of them has like Death Touch, both those creatures are going to die. It does require a little bit of setup, right? And again, you can use this as 5 mana instant speed pounce or prey upon, which is not good, but it could get the trick done. So there's a little bit of flexibility here. This has the potential to make your opponent's 2 best creatures kill each other, but a lot of times that doesn't actually work out that way. Like if they have one really big creature and one really small creature, you're not going to be able to use this to take out the big creature, but you can take out the small creature. 5 mana is a lot to do that, to not take out your opponent's best creature, but this has the potential to do so. It seems like, to me, potential second-rate removal when it comes to limited, but has the potential to just completely blow your opponent out too. We can talk about this entire cycle real quick. There are 5 crystals. They are 3 mana rocks, 1 for each of the kind of terrains, I guess. Like Ketria is the Temur terrain. I'm still going to call it Temur, I'm sorry. They're all 3 mana. They all tap for any one color of their, respective clan or terrain or whatever you want to call it. Triome, I think is what they called it. And then you can cycle it for 2 mana. So this is decent mana fixing because it has cycling, right? We saw the banners back in cons, and I really hated those. Those did the same thing, but they didn't have cycling. You would pay 3 mana to sacrifice them, which means you had to dump all this mana to just replace them with a card. These give you the choice of, hey, do you need mana ramp? Well, go ahead and play it on turn 3. Do you not need mana ramp? Is it later in the game? Okay, well, cycle this thing away, right? If you drew a banner really late in the game in cons, you'd have to pay 3 mana to cast it, 3 mana to sack it. So 6 mana essentially to cycle it, whereas these let you just cycle for 2 mana. So I actually do like these, and it does seem like mana fixing might be relevant in this set. It's a 3-color set where it looks like you're going to be playing 2 colors a lot, but some of the rares ask that you move into a 3rd color. So these are all pretty good. I don't know how much you actually need, but there's also a cycling deck from what I can tell, and that actually boosts the playability of these cards as well. So we've got a couple more here, about 5 or 6 more, and then we'll cut it for the second half. Call of the Death Dweller. These are like little rat people coming out of the depths. I don't know, kind of gross. Call of the Death Dweller is 2 and a black for a sorcery. Return up to 2 target creatures with total converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, but a death touch counter on either of them. Put a menace counter on either of them. Okay, so normally I'm a big fan of the 3 mana reanimate or return 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand, the double raise dead effects that we get in basically every limited set now. This one's a little sketch because you either bring back a 2-drop and a 1-drop, or 2 1-drops, or you bring back a 3-drop, right? You can't return anything that costs 4 or greater from your graveyard to the battlefield or to your hand or anything. It puts the creatures on board, which is good, but those creatures are going to be small. The thing is, it gives one of them menace and one of them death touch, or you can put both counters on the same creature. So reanimating a small death touch creature while also getting potentially another body seems okay. And 3 mana to bring back a 3-drop and give it menace or death touch might be fine as well. So this card has some potential to be a 2-for-1, albeit a small 2-for-1, and has potential to always just be a 1-for-1 if you bring back a 3-drop creature and give it Death Touch and Menace, which could be very relevant. So actually, maybe I'm underrating this. If you bring back a creature, a 3-mana creature with Death Touch and Menace, that's probably a good creature. So as a 1-for-1, this would probably be okay. But it does require a little bit of deck build-in restrictions, right? You probably ideally want a couple 1 and 2 drops in your deck for this to be an actual 2-for-1. I don't know. It seems interesting to me. I would rather it just return 2 creatures to my hand, but we've been a little spoiled with those effects lately. Glowstone Recluse. Ooh, hello. I think every mutate creature is just going to have an alternate art. That's pretty sweet. Glowstone Recluse is a 2 and a green for a 2/3 spider with reach. It's uncommon. Okay. 2 mana 2/3 reach is pretty good at dealing with the flyers. It says whenever this creature mutates, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Mutate cost is 4. So this is actually one of those nice versatile creatures that it doesn't matter too much whether you put it on the top or bottom of the stack. You're probably putting it on the bottom if you cast this from your hand, because you'll probably get something that's better than a 2/3 on board. And then this gives the creature that you mutated onto reach and 2 additional counters. Even if you have to put a creature underneath this, like just a dorky mutate creature that you put underneath Glowstone Recluse, you'll still get 2 extra counters, make this a 4/5 with reach and whatever other ability you added onto it. So yeah, actually, it might not matter which... I guess if you mutate on top of this, like if you put the 6/6 on top of this and then it gets 2 counters, you just made an 8/8 with reach and some other ability. This seems like a nice little base creature to be mutating onto. It's like the egg, right? We said with the egg, that's supposed to be your like little starter kit. It's supposed to say, hey, mutate onto me a bunch of times and get an extra little value. This thing does the same thing, but gives you actually quite a bit of value. 2 +1/+1 counters is no joke, and reach is a relevant ability if you have to end up blocking flyers. All right, 4 more cards. Let's go ahead and jam these. Some of them are just like commons and uncommons. Keep Safe, 1 in a blue. It's an instant that says counter target spell that targets a permanent you control and then draw a card. Look, I'm more of a fan of cards like this, like these turn aside type cards that just counter abilities that target your stuff. I'm more of a fan of those than most people because you usually just use it to, counter a removal spell. If your opponent goes 4 mana, kill your creature, and I go Keep Safe, then, I paid 2 mana to stop your 4 mana spell, and I get to keep my creature. And sometimes it ends up being a dead card. You don't always want it. But the fact that this one replaces itself means that you're probably going to be pretty happy to play the first copy. And if you can just keep 2 mana up to keep your creature safe, you'll be pretty happy with it. Also, note that this type of effect seems extremely prevalent, or not prevalent, but extremely useful in a set that asks you to keep putting a bunch of your resources onto one creature. So if you are mutating the same stack of creatures, and you need to make sure that creature is not going to die, you can keep a copy of Keep Safe in your hand, and you even get to cantrip it. So I think this card is going to be played kind of like a Karametra's Blessing, Starlit Mantle type effect, right? Where you just kind of hold it. Actually, it's very similar, right? In Theros Beyond Death, a lot of times you put a bunch of auras on the same creature, and you just need to make sure it doesn't die, so you hold up a Starlit Mantle. Keep Safe does a very similar role to that. Cheville. Bane of Monsters. Look at this guy. Anyway, black-green for a 1/3 Mythic legendary human rogue. Okay, we got another human. It has Death Touch, so 2 mana 1/3 Death Touch. Already pretty happy with that. Need a little bit more off my Mythic rare, though. And we get a little bit more. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if your opponents control no permanents with bounty counters on them, put a bounty counter on target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. And then whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, you gain 3 life and draw a card. This is Mathis, right? Mathis from the Commander deck, the Vampire deck, the one that puts bounty counters on your opponent's creatures, and then when they die, each of their opponents, I think, gains 2 life and draws a card. This is very similar, but it only benefits you. You gain 3 life and draw a card. So this is an upkeep trigger, which means you play Cheville. Okay, you have a Death Toucher on board, so if it trades off, that's fine. If not, your upkeep comes around, you choose one of their creatures, and you put a bounty counter on it, and then hopefully you can kill that creature, draw a card, gain some life, and then by the time your upkeep comes back around, you choose another thing with a bounty counter. You can't just stack bounty counters on a bunch of different things because it says if your opponent controls no permanents with bounty counters on them, then you get to do this. But if you're able to, just stack up a bunch of removal, kill a creature, draw a card, benefit off that, come back around, put another bounty counter on something, kill that creature, draw a card. You can actually go off with this. So I do think this is a justifiable Mythic rare. It does need you to back it up with some removal. But the bounty counter... Oh, this is a little different from Mathis, actually. This creature, Cheville, has to be on board when that creature dies in order for you to draw the stuff. It's not like Mathis where you just put the bounty counter on it, and then even if Mathis dies, you'll still draw the cards when the bounty counter creature dies. Cheville's a little different. It has to be on board when that creature dies in order for you to actually benefit off of it. It's also a little annoying, the bounty counter thing, just because there's so many counters. Like, if a trample counter gives trample, does a bounty counter give bounty? I don't know. Indestructible Link, we can go through this one pretty quick. 4 and a black sorcery, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it. That's okay. Again, I'm not a big fan of 5-mana reanimation spells, especially if they're sorcery, and especially if they only target creatures in my graveyard. But you can find a way to make this useful in a set that has giant cycling creatures. So probably a little bit better than the typical 5-mana Rise from the Graves type effect, but not nearly as good as the 6-mana instant speed fight reanimation card that we saw just a moment ago. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's playable. And then last card we'll talk about here, Tiger's Will. 1 in a white for an instant. Cycling for 2 mana. Already love it. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's blocking, instead put 2+1/+1 counters on it. That's actually a very powerful effect. So a reasonable combat trick, 2 mana +2/+2. That's a little bit on the expensive side, but you will get the job done a decent amount of the time. And then if you're using this in combat on your opponent's turn, you just put 2+1/+1 counters on your creature? Like, what? Okay. 2 mana for 2+1/+1 counters is a pretty good deal. And then it has Cyclone, right? You don't need a combat trick. You're winning. You're just crushing your opponent. Cycle into something that, gets the job done. Or +2/+2 is not going to cut it. Your opponent's just beating you down with an 11/11 trampler. Cycle this bad boy away, find a kill spell, something like that. So, decent combat trick overall. And, this has the potential to be just really strong. It does require that your opponent's attacking you a lot and that you leave blockers back in order for to actually get the full benefit, but still pretty good. So, that's the first half here. Well, we got just millions of cards to talk about, so we're going to go ahead and cut the video here. And I will be back for the second half of today's spoilers. Thanks for joining me, and we'll just go ahead and cut the outro short since I'll see you here again in another minute. Thanks for watching. My name's Timothy with Mana Rocks. See you shortly.